Welcome to Compact History from compacthistories.com, where we explore the stories, events, and moments that shaped the world, in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 112, The History of Printing. Long before ink met press, humanity was already obsessed with recording things. Who owed whom a goat? Which gods were annoyed this week? And which king wanted credit for a victory he may or may not have personally attended? The problem was not the lack of ideas, but the lack of efficient ways to preserve and share them. Before printing, every written word was either carved, painted, or copied by hand, and all three methods came with severe limitations. The earliest forms of written communication were literally set in stone. Cave paintings, clay tablets, and carved inscriptions were durable but inflexible. Once a message was etched into rock or baked into clay, editing was not an option. Mistakes were permanent, and updates required starting from scratch. These records were also heavy, slow to produce, and difficult to transport, which made widespread sharing of information nearly impossible. Papyrus and parchment improved matters, but introduced new challenges. Writing became lighter and more portable, yet reproduction remained painfully slow. Every document had to be copied by hand, letter by letter, often by trained scribes who spent years mastering their craft. In monasteries and royal courts, scriptoria became centers of knowledge production, but even at their most efficient, they were bottlenecks. A single book could take months or even years to copy, and errors crept in with alarming regularity. Scarcity shaped everything. Books were rare, expensive, and precious. Literacy remained confined mainly to elites, clergy, and administrators, not because ordinary people lacked intelligence, but because access to written material was tightly restricted by labor and cost. Knowledge moved slowly, passed orally, or through limited handwritten texts. Ideas spread at walking pace, carried by travelers, traders, and monks with good handwriting and questionable spelling consistency. Memory played a crucial role in this world. Oral traditions flourished because they had to. Epic poems, laws, genealogies, and histories were memorized and recited, evolving slightly with each retelling. Accuracy was valued, but adaptability mattered more. In many cultures, the spoken word carried as much authority as the written one, sometimes more. Writing was a support system for memory, not its replacement. What unified all pre-printing cultures was fragility. A fire, flood, or political purge could erase centuries of knowledge overnight. Libraries vanished, manuscripts decayed, entire bodies of work survived only through fragments or references. Preservation was heroic but unreliable. By the time printing arrived, the demand for information already existed. Societies were governing larger populations, religions were spreading across continents, and trade networks were expanding. The limitation was not imagination or intellect. It was scale. The world was ready for printing long before printing was ready for the world. The first true printing technologies did not emerge in Europe, but in East Asia, where the challenges of scale and administration were felt earlier and more intensely. As states grew larger and more complex, the need to reproduce texts consistently, efficiently, and in significant numbers became unavoidable. Long before presses and metal type, printers in China were already experimenting with ways to multiply words without copying them by hand. Woodblock printing was the earliest breakthrough. By the 7th century, artisans were carving entire pages of text into wooden blocks, inking them, and pressing paper onto the surface to create identical copies. The method was labor-intensive at the front end. Carving a block required time, skill, and patience, but once completed, it allowed for rapid reproduction. Religious texts, calendars, and official documents could now be produced in quantities previously unimaginable. One of the most famous survivors from this era is the Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 CE during the Tang dynasty. It is often cited as the world's oldest known printed book, complete with text and illustrations. Its existence alone demonstrates that printing was already sophisticated, organized, and culturally embedded. Printing was not a novelty, it was infrastructure. The next leap came with movable type. Around 1040 CE, the inventor Bi Sheng developed a system using individual characters made from baked clay. Instead of carving an entire page, printers could assemble text from reusable components, rearranging them for new pages. In theory, this was a revolutionary improvement. In practice, it faced significant obstacles. The Chinese writing system contains thousands of characters. Managing, sorting, and retrieving them was complex and time-consuming. For many printers, carving a single block remained simpler than organizing vast trays of type. Movable type existed, but it did not immediately replace woodblocks. Technology alone was not enough. It had to suit the language and the workflow. Elsewhere in East Asia, variations emerged. In Korea, metal movable type appeared as early as the 13th century, centuries before similar developments in Europe. These advances demonstrated remarkable technical skill, but again, linguistic complexity limited widespread adoption. Printing thrived, but it followed a different path. What mattered most was not which method dominated, but that the idea of mechanical reproduction had taken root. Printing became an accepted tool for governance, religion, and education. Texts could be standardized, errors could be corrected at the source rather than multiplied through copying. Knowledge gained stability. By the time printing reached Europe, it was not arriving as a wild invention from nowhere. It was entering a world that had already proven the concept. The East had solved the problem of reproduction. The West would later solve the problem of explosive scale. When printing finally transformed Europe in the mid-15th century, it did so with extraordinary speed and consequence. The technology itself was not entirely new. Presses, paper, ink, and movable components all existed in some form. But what changed was how efficiently they were combined. At the center of this convergence was Johannes Gutenberg, whose work in Mainz triggered one of the most profound shifts in human communication. Gutenberg's key innovation was not simply movable type, but metal movable type produced to exact standards. Using a hand mold, individual letters could be cast quickly, uniformly, and in vast quantities. Unlike clay or wood, metal type was durable and precise, capable of producing thousands of impressions without degrading. Combined with an oil-based ink that adhered cleanly to metal and a modified screw press adapted from winemaking, the system worked smoothly, repeatedly, and at scale. The result was speed. Books that once took months or years to copy by hand could now be produced in weeks. Costs fell dramatically. Texts became more consistent, with fewer copying errors, and layouts became standardized. For the first time, a reader in one city could be confident that their book matched the one read hundreds of miles away. The most famous product of this system was the Gutenberg Bible, completed around 1455. It was not the first book printed in Europe, but it demonstrated what the new technology could achieve. The text was clear, uniform, and visually impressive, intentionally resembling high-quality manuscripts to reassure skeptical buyers. Printing did not announce itself as disruptive. It disguised itself as familiar perfection. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Printers spread rapidly across Europe, establishing presses in Italy, France, England, and beyond within decades. Classical texts were rediscovered and circulated. New works appeared faster than authorities could regulate them. Literacy began to expand beyond the clergy and elites. not because education suddenly improved, but because reading material became accessible. Printing also altered the balance of power. Ideas could now move faster than institutions designed to control them. Religious texts were translated, pamphlets circulated, and dissent gained a physical form that could be duplicated endlessly. The written word became portable, persistent, and increasingly uncontrollable. Perhaps most importantly, printing changed how people thought about knowledge itself. Information was no longer fragile or singular. It could be copied, challenged, corrected, and built upon. Errors could be fixed in new editions. Arguments could be answered in print. Learning became cumulative in a way it had never been before. Gutenberg did not live to see the full impact of his work, and he died without great wealth. But his system reshaped the world. Metal type turned writing into an industry, reading into a mass activity, and ideas into forces that could no longer be easily contained. The age of print had begun, and there would be no turning back. Once printing spread beyond workshops and universities, it escaped the control of the elites who had initially embraced it. What followed was not just an information boom, but a social upheaval. Printing did not merely reproduce ideas, it amplified them, accelerated them, and placed them directly into the hands of people who had never previously been part of the conversation. The most disruptive force was the pamphlet. Cheap to produce, easy to distribute, and short enough to be read quickly, pamphlets became the social media posts of the early modern world. They allowed arguments, complaints, satire, and propaganda to circulate at unprecedented speed. Crucially, they did not require institutional approval. Anyone with a message who had access to a press could reach an audience far beyond their immediate surroundings. Religion felt the impact first and hardest. In 1517, Martin Luther challenged church authority with a set of arguments that would likely have remained local without printing. Instead, his ideas were translated, printed, and circulated across Europe in months. The Protestant Reformation was not caused by printing, but printing made it unstoppable. Competing interpretations of faith could now exist simultaneously, each backed by stacks of identical texts. Political power soon followed. Rulers and rebels alike recognized that controlling the narrative mattered as much as controlling territory. Governments issued proclamations and laws in print, asserting authority through repetition and visibility. Opponents responded in kind, producing counter-arguments, exposés, and biting satire. Public opinion, previously shaped largely through sermons and rumors, began to coalesce around printed words. This period also saw the rise of censorship and licensing. Authorities quickly realized that unrestricted printing was dangerous. Printers were monitored, presses seized, and books banned. Indexes of prohibited works appeared, attempting to stem the flow of heretical or subversive ideas. Yet suppression often backfired. Banned texts gained notoriety, and underground printing networks flourished. Once the technology existed, it could not be uninvented. Printing reshaped education as well. Textbooks standardized learning, allowing students in different regions to study the same material. Universities expanded their reach, and literacy slowly spread down the social ladder. Reading became a private act as well as a communal one, encouraging individual interpretation rather than shared oral authority. This shift quietly changed how people related to knowledge and belief. Perhaps the most profound change was psychological. Printing encouraged comparison. When multiple viewpoints appeared in black and white, readers were forced to evaluate them. Truth became something to be argued for, not merely received. Authority weakened as debate strengthened. By turning ideas into physical objects that could be multiplied endlessly, printing altered the balance between power and people. Pamphlets and books became tools of persuasion, resistance, and reform. Society was no longer shaped only by those who could speak the loudest, but by those who could print the most effectively. By the late 18th century, printing was on the verge of another transformation, driven not by ideas, but by machines. The hand-operated presses that had changed Europe were reaching their limits in a world that demanded faster communication, larger audiences, and cheaper production. As populations grew and literacy spread, printing had to keep up. The answer arrived in the form of steam power and industrial engineering. The first significant breakthrough came with mechanized presses. In 1814, Friedrich Koenig introduced a steam-powered press capable of producing thousands of impressions per hour, far beyond what any hand press could manage. Newspapers were the immediate beneficiaries. For the first time, daily publications could be produced in large quantities quickly enough to report recent events rather than yesterday's news. Information began to move at something approaching the speed of society itself. Alongside steam power came new printing methods. Rotary presses replaced flat beds with rotating cylinders, allowing continuous printing on long rolls of paper. This dramatically increased output and reduced costs. Printing was no longer a craft carried out by small teams of skilled artisans. It became an industry, staffed by operators, engineers, and factory workers. Speed mattered more than elegance. Volume mattered more than tradition. Paper production also changed. Handmade paper, made from rags, was expensive and limited. The introduction of wood pulp paper in the 19th century made raw materials cheap and abundant. Books, newspapers, posters, and magazines flooded the market. Print became disposable. Yesterday's paper wrapped fish. Pamphlets littered the streets. The written word lost some of its physical permanence, but gained cultural dominance. This era reshaped society's relationship with information. Newspapers became mass entertainment and political weapons. Serialized novels reached audiences who could not afford bound books. Advertising exploded, filling columns and pages with promises, slogans, and brand identities. Print shaped consumer culture as much as it shaped opinion. Standardization increased further. Typefaces, layouts, and formats became consistent across publications. Time itself became synchronized as newspapers reported schedules, timetables, and shared events. Reading habits shifted from careful study to rapid consumption. Skimming became a skill. Headlines became weapons. Yet industrialization came at a cost. Small printers struggled to compete. Labor conditions were often harsh. The romance of the printing workshop faded into the noise and heat of factories. Critics worried that speed would undermine quality and that quantity would drown meaning. Despite these concerns, industrial printing cemented print as the dominant medium of the modern world. By making text cheap, fast, and everywhere, it ensured that reading was no longer an elite activity. Print became the background noise of daily life, constant, influential, and impossible to ignore. By the late 20th century, printing faced a challenge unlike any it had encountered before. For the first time, it was no longer the fastest or cheapest way to reproduce words. Digital technology rewrote the rules of communication, allowing text to be created, copied, and distributed instantly without ink, paper, or presses. Predictions of the death of print arrived quickly and loudly. As it turns out, they were only half right. The rise of computers and desktop publishing in the 1980s democratized design in much the same way printing once democratized reading. Word processors, laser printers, and layout software allowed individuals and small organizations to produce professional-looking documents without specialist training. printing did not disappear. It decentralized. The gatekeepers changed, but the output multiplied. The internet accelerated this shift dramatically. Text no longer needed to be printed at all to reach an audience. Blogs, news sites, and social media turned everyone into a potential publisher. Information became fluid, editable, and ephemeral. Unlike print, digital text could be altered after publication, corrected instantly, or erased entirely. Authority shifted again, this time towards speed and visibility rather than permanence. Yet print stubbornly refused to vanish. Instead, it adapted. As everyday information moved online, printed materials became more deliberate and more specialized. Books turned into curated experiences rather than default containers for text. High-quality printing, distinctive typography, and tactile materials gained new value precisely because they were no longer necessary. Print became a choice, not an obligation. New technologies blurred the boundary between digital and physical. Print on demand allowed books to be produced one copy at a time, eliminating warehousing and waste. Variable data printing made personalization possible at scale. Meanwhile, large-scale commercial printing remained essential for packaging, labeling, and logistics, the invisible infrastructure of global commerce. Culturally, printing gained a new role as a symbol of trust and seriousness. In an age of infinite scrolling and vanishing posts, printed words feel fixed and considered. A printed book implies effort, commitment, and finality. It cannot be quietly edited overnight. This perceived permanence has restored print's authority in certain contexts, from legal documents to education. It is tempting to frame the modern era as a battle between print and digital, but history suggests a different pattern. New media rarely erase old ones. They reposition them. Just as printing did not destroy handwriting, digital text has not destroyed print. Each has found its niche. The history of printing ends not with extinction, but with coexistence. Ink and pixels now share the task of carrying human thought. As long as people value clarity, memory, and the physical trace of ideas, printing will endure, not as the default voice of society, but as one of its most deliberate and enduring ones. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact History, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compacthistory.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, warfare, disasters, mysteries, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/historycoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.